Hey guys, this is review video number 3. Today we're going to look at the policy of containment in the Truman Doctrine. We've talked about this before. Hopefully you remember it. If not, I'll kind of do a brief version of this today. Um, so in order to understand these policies, I think it's important that we look at President Truman. President Truman took over after the passing of President Franklin Roosevelt right at the end of World War II. Um, Truman was a politician who kind of crawled his way up the ranks and somehow ended up at the vice president position. He was not a long-standing vice president. He'd only been there for a little while. Um, and fun fact for you, I believe Harry Truman was the last president that did not attend college. But moving on, when he had found out that President Roosevelt had died, he was in an incredibly stressful situation. The war was still raging on with Japan. He was kept out of the loop of most things. In fact, they said he had no idea about the Manhattan Project and did not know that we had developed an atomic bomb. He was quoted saying something along the lines, I'm paraphrasing, but I feel as if the moon, the stars, and the planets have all fallen down upon me, referring to his stress level. Um, as you know, he is the one that is going to give the orders to drop the atomic bombs on Japan, and he's going to be the president that's left to pick up the pieces when this whole thing is done. He's also going to be the one that is going to have to try to figure out what our policy dealing with the Soviet Union is. They're the only other superpower standing, and we talked about that in that capitalism and communism video that we published just the other day. So Harry Truman, not necessarily an incredibly popular president through his tenure. As you remember in class, it was thought that he was going to lose to Dewey. Ended up winning in a very close election. He desegregated the military in 1948, which was not popular among Southern Democrats and um, people that followed that ideology. But let's take a look at this today. Um, Please make sure you leave any comments about any questions or anything like you have in our Google Classroom. So after the war is over and the dust somewhat settles, now the dust isn't going to settle for a long time, and we'll talk about things like the Marshall Plan and things like that moving forward and how those really kind of go along with what we're talking about today. But Truman and his administration have to figure out a policy. They have to figure out a plan. What are we going to do to combat the Soviet Union? They are our only competitors right now, and we have completely different philosophical and economic ideologies. What's going to be the plan? The Soviets are not something that a lot of people are familiar with in the United States. It's a very different culture, um, obviously, than Western Europe or anything like that. So, what they do is they put their faith in people that have worked in the Soviet Union, that know a lot, people within the government. And the most important guy that we're going to talk about, probably the most important guy about this whole foreign policy in general, is a guy by the name of George Kennan. I want you to write that down. Okay, that's an important thing. George Kennan was an American diplomat that had spent a lot of time working in the Soviet Union, had a lot of experience. And what he explained to the Truman administration is that the Russians or the Soviets, they they feared Western invasion. They wanted a buffer zone. They also had an agenda to spread communism throughout the world. Um, and what he had basically told the Truman administration was, we're not going to be able to convince these guys that communism is not the way to go. Joseph Stalin, rules with an iron fist, and he sees his rule of this communist country as the right way to do things. The only thing that we can really do, he says, is use all of our resources, use money, use military force, use whatever it takes, diplomatic measures to contain communism. Okay, so that's a key word for today. It's one of the key words is containment. Okay, and if you think about it, it's pretty simple. If you think about a container that you were to pour water into, you pour water into a container, it stays contained. It doesn't go anywhere. It stays within those walls of that container. Now, if you're just to take a bucket of water and pour it on the floor with no container, then yeah, it's going to spread everywhere. So what George Kennan is saying is that our best policy combating the communists in the Soviet Union is to contain it. Okay, we can't hope that it's going to crumble and disappear right away. But if we could contain it, that'd be a great start. We're afraid of something called the domino theory, which I'll go into a little bit more detail later. Um, but if you've ever played with dominoes as a kid, not playing the actual game, but you just set them up, and then you tip one down. Um, Obviously, what you're trying to do is they all knock each other down before you know it. They're all laying on the ground. And the domino theory was that if communism spreads to one part of the world or the globe, um, it will continue to knock down countries, and they will fall to communism. And we'll take a look at that with China and some other places in just a little bit. So what Harry Truman's going to do is design, his policy for dealing with communism based off of the things that you saw come from George Kennan, and he's going to really build upon two existing doctrines or corollaries that existed before. If you look at the Monroe Doctrine in 1823 and the Roosevelt Corollary in 1904, those are things that already were in place, things that already existed, that basically made the United States the protectorate of the Western Hemisphere. Now, Truman is going to go to Congress in 1947 and ask for funding. And by 1948, we're going to see something called the Truman Doctrine. And what the Truman Doctrine is it's a promise really to the rest of the world that the United States will help democracies that are facing a communist takeover. Okay, you can call the United States at any time if you're facing the threat of a communist takeover, and we will provide diplomats, will provide money, will provide military aid. We'll do anything to attempt to stop the spread of communism and to keep containment um, alive. So we are going to see, tons of action and activity over the course of the next 45 years all over the globe because of this doctrine. In the next video, I believe we'll take a look at the Berlin airlift, which is kind of the first example of the United States. Maybe not the first example, but it's a good example of the United States providing aid um, to democratic nations or cities that are facing the threat of communism. So remember that. Please write it down. The Truman Doctrine is the statement or the promise to the rest of the world that the United States will help you if you are facing the threat of communism. We'll do this in any way possible. If it takes money, if it takes troops, if it takes people to talk or negotiate it out, we will provide those things. We're going to protect democracy all over the world.